أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم.
بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله رب العالمين، والصلاة والسلام على سيد الأشرف الأنبياء والمرسلين سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وأصحابه أجمعين. أما بعد، فأعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. We concluded last week's lesson by looking at the two profession or occupation of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and I mentioned that Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam by profession was a shepherd. He would graze flocks of sheep around the desert and the hills of Makkah Mukarramah. And I also mentioned last week why Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala chose this particular profession for Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. It is because those who look after look after sheep, it brings about humility and humbleness in their hearts. And also those who look after sheep, they have to be all the time alert, they have to be aware, and they have to be vigilant, because it could be possible that some fox or a wolf may come and attack their sheep. So they have to always be aware and alert. And similarly, the responsibility of a prophet is such that he always has to be alert of his people. Hence Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala wanted to train Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So hence he chose the profession of being a shepherd for Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Now, continuing with the story and the Seerah. In Makkah Mukarramah at that time, there was a woman in the name of Khadija bint Khuwaylid radiyallahu ta'ala anha. And she was well known in Makkah Mukarramah with the name Tahira, which meant the blessed and the purified. And she was given this particular name due to her piety and due to her chastity. Everyone around Makkah knew her as Tahira. Now, Khadija radhiyallahu anha was a very successful businesswoman, and she was successful because she would send traders to Syria, to Yemen, all these places, and they would trade on her behalf, and in that way she made most of her money. Now, at that time, Hazrat Khadija radhiyallahu anha was a bit disillusioned with many of the traders around Makkah, because what would happen is that many of them would take her money, they would deceive her, they would cheat her, they would lie to her, they would take so much money, and then some of them would run away, some of them would trade for her, but then they would be they would lie and they would cheat when it comes to how much profit she made, and so on and so forth. So at that time she was very disillusioned with many of the traders around Makkah. Now, she heard of a trader in the name of Muhammad Mustafa sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and she heard about his trustworthiness, she heard about his amanatdari. So she proposed to Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam a business venture where Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam would be sent to Syria. He would trade on behalf of Hazrat Khadija anha, and as a reward, Hazrat Khadija was willing to pay Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam double the rate what traders would have demanded in those days. So what the going rate was for trading, Khadija anha was willing to give Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam double their asking price. Now, Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam at first he refused this particular proposal, but it was later on when he saw that his uncle's business, Abu Talib's business, he was going through some financial difficulties. Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam thought that what I'll do is that I'll take up this particular proposal, I will trade for Khadija anha, and all the money I earn and I gain, I will then plow it and invest it back into my uncle's business. So Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam decided to take this particular proposal and this particular business venture up. Now, Khadija anha sent Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam to Syria, and also she sent her slave, whose name was Maysara, with Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam to Syria to accompany him and to see how Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam trades, whether he is respectful, whether he is polite, whether he is trustworthy, as people have said. Now, during this particular trip, Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam made a lot of money for Khadija anha. And when Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam came back, he gave everything back to Khadija anha. He was truthful. He said that, look, this is how much money I took. This is how much profit I made for each of the goods and everything. The full hisab kitab he gave to Khadija anha. Now, Khadija anha then asked Maysara that, did Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam do anything, again, away from the book? Did he bend the rules here and there? Did he say anything dodgy or anything like that? Maysara then said to Khadija that, no, everything Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam did with insaf. He did proper, trustworthy with everything. He did not cheat. He did not deceive you. He did not lie or anything like that. Totally according to the, Sharia, according to the manners, according to his akhlaq and characteristics. He did everything according to the book. Also, at the same time, Maysara then said to Khadija anha that during this trip, I saw some other amazing things happening with Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And then Maysara then narrated that once I was walking with Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, we were going through the desert, when I saw an angel come and putting shade or covering Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam's head. Because it was like very hot, so the angels would come and they would give saya and they would give shade over Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam's head. Now, it is possible for non-prophets or for an awam or for a normal person to see angels of Allah. There are many occasions, such as with Sayyidah Maryam radiallahu ta'ala anha. She wasn't a prophet of Allah, but even she saw angels. She saw Sayyidina Jibreel alayhi salam in his angelic form. There are also incidents of Sayyidah Hajira, who is the mother of Sayyidina Ismail alayhi salam. She also saw Sayyidina Jibreel alayhi salam in his angelic form. And other companions also, such as Imran bin Hussein radhiyallahu anhu, it's narrated that he also saw the Kiram Katibin in their angelic form. So it is possible for a non-prophet, for a normal person to see an angel of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. It all depends on Allah whether he wants to remove the veil of this dunya and on this world and see what is behind it. So similarly, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, he made Maysara see the various angels who would come and help Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam and would give Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam shade. Now, when Maysara informed everything to Khadija anha, Khadija then went to her cousin brother, whose name was Waraqa bin Nawfal, a very famous name, and we will be coming back to him afterwards. So Khadija anha went to Waraqa bin Nawfal and she said everything about Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, the characteristics, the manners, the politeness, so on and so forth. She also told Waraqa about what Maysara saw in this particular journey and travel. So Waraqa, who was also well versed when it came to divine scriptures and divine knowledge, he said to Khadija anha that if what Maysara is saying is true and what you have told me is true, then indeed this person is the final prophet of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, that he is destined to be the final prophet and the final messenger of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, who Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is going to give at the end of time. Now, when Khadija anha heard this from Waraqa bin Nawfal, she then had this feeling and she wanted to marry Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. She had this desire that I want to be the wife of this future prophet of this ummah and of this nation. So what happened was that she then proposed to Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, after taking mashwara and consultation from his uncle Abu Talib, he then accepted this particular proposal. So it was actually 2 months and 25 days after Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam returned back from Syria that he got married to Hazrat Khadija radiyallahu ta'ala anha. And it's mentioned that the dowry which was stipulated, there are 2 opinions. One opinion was One opinion is that Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam gave her 20 camels, so that was the dowry, that was the mahar. And the second opinion is that Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam gave her 500 silver coins, 500 dirhams. So it could be around, this day and age, around 700, 800 pounds. That's how much Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam gave Hazrat Khadija anha the dowry and the mahar. Now, as all of you know, that Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam at that time was 25 years old, and Khadija anha was 40. And it was Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam's first marriage, and it was Khadija anha's third marriage. And we'll come back to some virtues and some fazail regarding Khadija anha later on when I'm going to touch on the Azwaj Mutahharat and the blessed wives of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Now, I'm just going to elaborate on this particular topic slightly. What we've understood from this particular marriage is that it was Khadija anha who proposed to Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And this takes me on to a common question here which people ask, and that is it considered permissible for women or for parents of the girl to propose to the boy that we've got a daughter, we've got a sister, do you want your son to marry our daughter, do you want your son to marry our sister, and so on and so forth. The norm in society is that it's the groom's family, they should propose. That is considered the norm, that is considered like culture. However, certain people think or assume that if the girl's family were to propose, then that is considered against the Sharia, that is considered behaya, that is considered immoral, that is considered immodest. But when we look through hadith literature in particular, we can clearly see that there is nothing wrong if the girl's family, if the parents, or if an uncle, if a grandfather, if a cousin brother, or someone were to offer the girl or were to propose for the girl to the groom's family, there is nothing wrong with that according to the Sharia, and you cannot consider that to be behaya, you cannot consider it to be immoral or immodest. An example of that can be found in a hadith of Sahih al-Bukhari, a very famous hadith, that when Sayyida Hafsa radhiyallahu anha, the daughter of Sayyidina Umar bin Khattab radhiyallahu anhu, so when her husband, whose name was Hunayt, passed away, Sayyidina Umar bin Khattab radhiyallahu anhu went to Usman radhiyallahu anhu, and he offered his daughter to Hazrat Usman radhiyallahu anhu, and he said that, look, my daughter Hafsa, she's a widow, her husband has passed away, I offer my daughter to you. So Hazrat Usman radhiyallahu anhu said to Umar that, give me a few days to think about it. Hazrat Usman radhiyallahu anhu did some mashwara. A couple of days later he came back and he said to Hazrat Umar radhiyallahu anhu that, look, I don't want to get married now, I don't have the means to get married. So then Hazrat Umar radhiyallahu anhu then offered Hafsa to Abu Bakr radhiyallahu anhu. Now Hazrat Abu Bakr radhiyallahu anhu didn't reply. He actually totally blanked the particular question posed by Hazrat Umar radhiyallahu anhu. And it goes into the hadith that Hazrat Umar radhiyallahu anhu was actually more upset with Abu Bakr radhiyallahu anhu than with Usman radhiyallahu anhu. Why? Because at least Hazrat Usman gave him a straight answer, said, look, yes or no. But Hazrat Abu Bakr radhiyallahu anhu actually totally blanked this particular question, and he didn't actually reply to Umar radhiyallahu anhu whether he wants to get married or whether he doesn't want to get married. It's like, say, for example, if somebody tells you straightforward, like, oh, I can't do this, I can't do that, you appreciate him for being straightforward and being upfront with you. But if somebody then doesn't really give you an answer, then you get a bit more agitated, a bit frustrated that why isn't he giving me a straight answer? So exactly here as well, that Umar radhiyallahu anhu was actually upset more with Abu Bakr radhiyallahu anhu because he didn't give him a clear answer whether he wanted to get married to Hafsa or not. A couple of days later, Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam then proposed to Umar bin Khattab radhiyallahu anhu for his daughter Hafsa, and Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam got married to Hafsa. Afterwards, Umar radhiyallahu anhu then met Abu Bakr radhiyallahu anhu, and Abu Bakr radhiyallahu anhu said to Umar that day when you proposed your daughter to me, you were probably a bit upset, a bit miffed about why didn't I reply to you. Then Abu Bakr radhiyallahu anhu then replied by saying that, look, the reason why I didn't want to say yes or no is because I heard Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam that he wanted to marry Hafsa, that he had an intention, he had a desire to marry Hafsa. Now, if I was to say, no, I don't want to marry Hafsa, then you're going to ask me why. Why don't you want to marry Hafsa? Then I have to then let you into the secret which I shared with Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, that he had an intention to marry Hafsa. And obviously I can't say yes, because obviously Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam wanted to marry Hafsa. So that's why I didn't give you a reply whether I wanted to marry Hafsa or not. So what we can understand from this particular hadith is that it is permissible for a father to offer his daughter. Like in this case, Umar radiallahu anhu offering his daughter Hafsa to Hazrat Uthman radiallahu anhu firstly, and then after his refusal to Hazrat Abu Bakr radiallahu anhu. And there's also examples of that in the Quran as well, of when Hazrat Shu'aib alayhi salam, when he saw the beautiful characteristics and manners of Hazrat Musa alayhi salam, that he offered one of his two daughters to Hazrat Musa alayhi salam. And there are many examples even with Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam as well, that women coming to Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam and offering themselves. It's mentioned in the books of hadith that two women, one Zainab bint Khuzaymah, who was the fourth wife of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, she actually offered herself to Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. What I mean by offer, she came directly to Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam and she said, I want to marry you. So Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam got married to her. And another wife, whose name was Maymuna radiallahu anha, again, some scholars have said that she also offered herself to Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So what I'm trying to say from this particular story and just in general, that it is considered valid, it is considered permissible. You cannot consider it behaya, you cannot consider it immoral or immodest if the girl's family were to go directly to the boy's family and were to offer their daughter or propose for their daughter directly. It's not considered behaya, it's not considered immoral, and we can quite clearly see from the hadith. Anything which the companions done, then how can we consider that to be behaya? How can we consider that to be immoral? And even in the story which I mentioned as well, Khadija anha offering, proposing on her behalf to Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So from this we can understand that it is a teaching of Islam that it is permissible for the girl to offer herself, and also permissible for the girl's family to, what I'm trying to say, to initiate the nikah. Like if they were to make the first steps in terms of phoning the groom's family and say that, look, we've got a daughter, we've got a sister, are you interested, and so on, then that is not considered immoral, and that is not certainly considered against the Sharia. Now moving along with the Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam seerah and his early life. Before Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam was born, and I mentioned this in the tafsir on Sunday, the Baytullah was constructed twice. It was constructed firstly by Sayyiduna Adam alayhi salam, and thereafter it was constructed by Sayyiduna Ibrahim alayhi salam. Now 5 years before Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam's bi'sat and prophethood, so it was when Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam was 35 years old, the Baytullah was, over many years, the foundation of the Baytullah had become weak. And in particular, the roof of the Baytullah was very, very weak, and it was really badly damaged, to the extent that there were many, many cracks and holes on the roof, or in the roof of the Baytullah. So whenever there would be any rain, the water would seep through, to the extent that certain times when there was really heavy rain, the whole Baytullah would actually be full of water. So what happened was that they needed to actually reconstruct the Baytullah, mend the walls, get a new roof, and so on and so forth, so that it gets stopped from any kind of future flooding. Now there was a person at that time whose name was Abu Wahab bin Amr al-Makhzumi, and he was the uncle of Abdullah, the father of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Now he at that time was the leader of the Banu Hashim, the tribe of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Now he got all the leaders of Quraysh together, and he sat them down and he said that, look, we need to reconstruct the Baytullah again, we need to put more stronger foundations, the walls have to be knocked down, we need to put new walls down, and so on and so forth. And then he asked everyone to donate for this noble cause. Now listen carefully what he then said. He then said that we have to donate for this noble cause. Then he said, I am not going to accept any haram mal for this construction. Now look at Abu Wahab. He's not a Muslim. He's a mushrik. He's an idol worshipper. But even he recognized the value of building the Baytullah. He said that, look, I'm not going to accept any haram mal. I'm going to build the Baytullah, but I'm not going to accept only halal wealth and lawful mal. I'm not going to accept any haram. So obviously in those days, they were, the Quraysh, they were well known for doing haram things, like interest, gambling. These were normal things. He said, I'm not going to accept interest money. I'm not going to accept gambling money. It was also very common in those days that the Quraysh leaders, they had many slave girls, so they would send them out for prostitution. So he goes, I'm not going to accept those money. Only money I'm going to accept is halal and lawful money. So this is being said by a mushrik and an idol worshipper. So imagine nowadays whenever we want to build a masjid or an institution, then we don't care, we just give haram money, our interest money, which is in the bank account, we get it out, we give it to the masjid and so on. That is totally wrong. It's not going to be accepted by Allah. So even the idol worshipper in those days, they also knew the value of building a house of Allah, because they knew Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, or God, is pure, He only accepts halal and lawful things. So Abu Wahab, he made sure, yes, that the money he collected, the donation money he collected, it was all going to be halal and lawful. And then it's mentioned that they then constructed the Baytullah. Now, when they were constructing the Baytullah, everything was ready, the roof was made, the walls, everything was put into place. Then there was one final thing left of the Baytullah, and that is to place the Hajri Aswad, the black stone, into its rightful place. Now that is considered to be like the icing on the cake. It's like, say for example, like a football team when they win and then they lift the trophy. So the placing the black stone in its place, that was the main thing. The other things about constructing the wall, they weren't really, obviously they made it, but they weren't really like concentrate on that. All the leaders of the Quraysh, they wanted the honor to place the black stone in its rightful place. Now when the opportunity came, everyone started like quarreling, disputing. They said, no, we want to put it. The other clan was saying, no, we want to put the black stone. So they did everything, and they were now going to wage war with each other. So who will have the honor to place the black stone in its rightful place? They were going to like kill each other. They got their swords out. They were going to let's go outside and let's like have a fight about it, and whoever wins will put it in. So they went to that particular extreme. Even though the previous month they were working together, building the Baytullah, but when that thing came, that's it. Everybody went back to their tribal feud and said, no, it's our, we want to do it, no, we want to do it, and so on. Now one of them then stood up and he said that, look, this is silly. Like, why are we just fighting over, why are we about to kill each other for placing the black stone in its rightful place? So they then said that, okay, tomorrow morning, the very first person who comes into the Baytullah, we're going to make him the hakam. Hakam meaning we're going to make him the judge. And whatever he says, whatever faisla he gives, we'll act upon it. Now, the next morning, they all went there early, and they were waiting to see who will be the very first person to come into the haram and into the Baytullah. The very first person to come was Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam when they looked at Rasulullah sallallahu, they knew, because obviously at that time he was the laqab of Amin and Sadiq, and he was well known for his politeness, his characteristics, his akhlaq, everything. So when they saw Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, they knew that this was from Allah, that this person was meant to come and he was given to them by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So then they explained the situation to Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, what they were going to do, and so on and so forth. Then Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam gave them the faisla and the judgment. He said that, okay, place the black stone on top of a piece of cloth. So a big massive piece of cloth, place the black stone on top of it. And then he told the leaders of all the tribes of Quraysh to pick the piece of cloth. So they all did that. And when they picked it up and took it near to the place where the black stone was going to be put, Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam himself got hold of the black stone and he put it inside. So when that happened, then they were all happy with Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam's judgment, and they respected what Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam did. What we can understand from here is even Rasulullah sallallahu wasn't a prophet at that time, but from that particular age he still had that wisdom, how to give a particular judgment and how to give a particular faisla. Now, Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, before he received bi'sat and prophethood, just a few more points before we finish. Even though he wasn't a prophet at that particular time, but Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala from a very young age had given Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam understanding of the attributes of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Meaning that even though Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam didn't receive any kind of wahi or revelation, he wasn't a prophet at that particular time, but from a young age, Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam knew that, there is only one God, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, very importantly, kept Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam away from any forms of kufr and any forms of shirk. Because just say nauzubillah, thumma nauzubillah, if sallallahu alaihi wasallam just say once worship the idol, and then afterwards Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam was then claiming the oneness of Allah, then people won't take him seriously. People say, oh well, he used to worship idols, he says, now you're saying there's only one God and so on. People won't take that da'wah and preaching seriously. It's like sometimes it happens here as well, that there may be someone who used to hang around with, take drugs with and so on. Then afterwards you see him like he's become religious and now he's telling you, oh, don't do drugs. And you think, oh, well, he used to do drugs with me, 10 years ago, now you're telling me not to do this. People don't take that person seriously. So exactly here as well, that it was very important that Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam was kept away from kufr and shirk. And there's many examples. There's a hadith that once Sayyidina Ali radhiyallahu anhu asked Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam that, did you ever worship idols? So Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam said no. And then he asked Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam that, did you ever drink alcohol? Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam said no. And then Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam said, these things, i.e. kufr and shirk and drinking alcohol, when I reached puberty, these things, I developed this nafrat from it from a very young age. I've developed this kind of like dislike for it and this detestability from it from a very young age. So what we can see is that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala protected Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam from unlawful and from bad things. I'll just mention another hadith before we finish. Again, similar to what I mentioned, that Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam having this detestability and this dislike for idols and so on and so forth, that during the days of ignorance, Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam once was doing tawaf around the Baytullah with Zayd bin Thabit radhiyallahu anhu. So as I mentioned many times before, that even though there was no Islam at that time, but the Arabs, they would still do tawaf around the Baytullah, they would still go for Hajj and so on. So similarly, Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, once he was doing tawaf around the Baytullah with Zayd bin Thabit radhiyallahu anhu. Now in those days, the pagans of Makkah, not only did they have idols around Makkah and around the Baytullah, they also had idols on Mount Safa and also on Mount Marwa. Now what happened was that there were two idols, one was on top of Safa and one was on top of Marwa. The names of the idols were Isaf and Naila. Now what happened was that Isaf and Naila, they were two couples or two lovers, and in the haram they committed zina, they committed adultery. So what happened was that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's wrath and anger came to them, and all of a sudden, like instantly, these two people, Isaf and Naila, they were turned into stone. They were turned into stone straight away. Allah's azab came, killed them, and they were automatically turned into stone. Now what happened was that they were just left there, and initially it was meant to be a deterrent. Like, look, these two, they're deterrent. Never ever commit the crime of zina and adultery in the haram, otherwise Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will do this to you. So initially they were just there, people will just walk past it and they will just take like lesson and heed that, look, not to commit any kind of deeds or bad deeds, shall I say, in the haram. But later on what happened was that the people, they started then putting these idols on Mount Safa and Mount Marwa, and instead of using them as a deterrent, they started going there and started worshipping them. So what would happen is that when Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam was doing sa'i between Safa and Marwa, Zayd bin Thabit radhiyallahu anhu was about to touch the idol, just to touch it. Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam saw him, and then he scolded him and he said that never ever touch these idols. And he said that, look, this is something which is haram, these are like made out of stone, they can't benefit anyone, they can't help anyone, So never ever touch these idols again. So just from this particular story, we can see that this nafrat, as we say in Urdu, or this kind of detestability or dislike of idol worshipping and shirk and ascribing partners with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala was put into Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam's heart from the very beginning. Okay, because as I said before that Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam was going to be trained to be a prophet of Allah, messenger of Allah, someone who is going to claim the oneness and preach the oneness of Allah. So the detestability, the dislike of bad things and evil things is put in the heart of an individual from before. And we can see many examples of, even nowadays, of very, very pious people and akabirin, that when you sometimes read their sawani and their life story, they'll say that from a young age, they had this kind of nafrat, say, of music, or they had this kind of nafrat of, say, haram things. They would say that I had this nafrat from before. So even though they don't become obviously prophets or messengers, but they reach the status of wilayat and they be friends of Allah. But when you read their story, they'll say that at the beginning we had this nafrat of music or things which the youth would do when around our age, like music and say unlawful contact with women and so on. They'll say that from a young age we had this nafrat and this detestability and dislike for that. So the reason why is that so Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala can train them to be pious people of Allah, servants of Allah, so that whenever they give da'wah or preach, then no one can say to them or raise a finger against them and say, well, you used to listen to music as well, used to take drugs with me, used to smoke, used to have girlfriend, and no one would be able to use that particular angle to put that person down. So same here as well, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala was going to choose Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. He was the chosen person to convey the message of Allah. He was going to be the final prophet. Hence, Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam's characteristics, his akhlaq, it has to be impeccable. Okay, there can't be any blemishes. Okay, even before, when Rasulullah wasn't a prophet, so you could say that there could be some kind of flexibility, but no, even then there couldn't be any blemishes, there couldn't be any flaws, otherwise people would have touched on that. May Allah give us the tawfiq to act on what we said. Wa akhir da'wana. MashaAllah.